Hey guys, tonight we are going underground. Not in the dramatic modern sense, where someone has purchased 12 years of canned beans, installed a steel door, and begun explaining cryptocurrency to increasingly worried relatives. We are going underground properly, into the earth-covered homes, storage chambers, protected entrances, and carefully engineered winter systems developed by Indigenous peoples across North America. And before we begin, a genuine thank you to everyone who has been asking for more Indigenous history on the channel. These subjects deserve patience, accuracy, and considerably more attention than they usually receive. Too often, Native American history is compressed into a vague montage involving teepees, horses, and someone staring meaningfully across a plain. Tonight, we are doing something more specific. We will spend most of our time among the Mandan and Hidatsa communities of the upper Missouri River, particularly around the beginning of the 19th century. We will also look at related Earth Lodge traditions among nations including the Arikara and Pawnee, before travelling farther west and backward through time to examine older pit house systems used in other regions. These were not identical cultures. They did not all build the same homes, follow the same seasonal routines, or understand those structures in the same way. What they shared was an extremely practical awareness that winter does not care how optimistic you feel about it. If you enjoy the channel, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to, no pressure. It helps enormously, but so does sleeping. And tonight, sleeping is clearly the more urgent project. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what the weather is doing outside. Somewhere, someone is listening during a heat wave and feeling personally mocked by this entire subject. The channel is also on Spotify, so you can find us there through the link in the description. Now dim the lights. Put a fan on if you have one, pull the blanket higher, adjust the pillow until your neck stops submitting formal complaints. Get truly comfortable. Because tonight, you are going to discover what happens when the outside temperature falls, the wind begins moving across the northern plains with criminal intent, and your survival depends on a house made from cottonwood, willow, grass, soil, and the collective knowledge of people who have been solving this problem for generations. How do you place several tons of earth over a wooden roof without joining your ancestors prematurely? Why is the doorway shaped like a tunnel? How do you keep a central fire burning without filling the entire lodge with smoke? What happens when snow blocks the entrance? Why is there food buried beneath the floor? Why is the family's finest horse standing inside the house? And how many relatives can share one circular room before somebody begins staring at the blizzard as though it might offer privacy? Most importantly, could you survive a northern winter without central heating, electric light, weather forecasts, insulated boots, grocery deliveries, or a glowing rectangle informing you that it feels 2 degrees colder than it actually is? Congratulations! You have just woken beside the Knife River, near its meeting with the Missouri. The season is winter. The year is roughly 1804. The Mandan and Hidatsa villages here were established long before your arrival, and their earth lodges rise from the snowy ground like low, rounded hills. The wind outside is howling across the plains. Snow presses against the entrance. Smoke curls through a hole in the roof. Several members of your extended family are already awake. A child is moving somewhere beneath a buffalo robe, and one extremely valuable horse is breathing in the corner. Welcome to winter on the upper Missouri. Your roof is currently holding up the prairie. Try not to think about it. 1. You wake beneath several tons of prairie. Let's begin with waking up. You open your eyes beneath a roof carrying logs, willow branches, dried grass, packed soil, and enough frozen prairie to make sleeping under the stars feel unnecessarily ambitious. The fire at the center of the lodge has burned down to red coals. Its light barely reaches the outer walls where robes, baskets, tools, and sleeping figures emerge from the darkness. Smoke hangs overhead before finding the opening in the roof. The air smells of earth, ash, hide, wood, and the warmth of everyone who has spent the night together in one circular room. Outside, the winter wind moves across the upper Missouri plains with little to stop it. It scrapes over the snow, pushes against the village, and tests every entrance as though offended that anyone has built shelter here. Inside, however, the cold arrives slowly. The thick earth covering does not create warmth, but it softens the violent changes outside. The ground holds a steadier temperature than the open air, while the rounded roof gives the wind less wall to strike. Your home is not defeating winter, it is simply refusing to argue with it directly. You remain beneath your buffalo robe for another moment. This is partly practical and partly because getting out of bed before daylight remains a poor idea regardless of century. The robe traps your body heat, and the sleeping platform keeps you above the coldest air near the floor. Around you, other members of the household begin to stir. A child whispers. Someone coughs through the last smoke from the evening fire. Near the entrance, a horse shifts and gives a low breath, reminding you that the household includes one resident too valuable to leave outside. The lodge may hold an extended family of 10, 15, or even 20 people. Beds and platforms line the outer wall, divided by posts, hanging robes, stored belongings, and mutual understanding. Privacy exists mainly as a social agreement. You learn not to stare, not to ask unnecessary questions, and not to react when an older relative begins discussing someone else's marriage before sunrise. Modern people have bedrooms and noise-cancelling headphones. You have good manners and a robe pulled higher over your head. Someone rises to tend the fire. Dry wood is placed over the coals, and the glow strengthens. Soon there is a small flame, then the crackle of burning cottonwood. Smoke rises toward the roof opening. Warmth returns to the centre first, leaving the sleeping areas cooler until everyone moves closer. The day will require water, fuel, food, clothing, repairs, and attention to the weather. None of these tasks can be postponed because you feel tired. Winter is not interested in your energy levels. As the fire brightens, the structure above becomes visible. 4 heavy central posts support crossbeams. Around them, shorter posts and rafters carry the layered roof. Every piece has been placed by people who understand how weight moves through wood and into the ground. You are lying beneath several tons of material, yet the lodge feels solid, familiar, and lived in. The roof has survived snow, rain, wind, heat, and years of smoke. A little soil may occasionally drift down, but this is treated as a domestic inconvenience rather than a reason to call an engineer. At last, you sit up. Cold air reaches beneath the robe and confirms that remaining horizontal had been the correct decision. Around you, the household is awake. The fire is growing. Snow presses against the entrance passage. Above your head rests the frozen prairie, held in place by timber, skill, and generations of experience. It is morning. Your ceiling is a field. 2. The house is a whole, but a very intelligent one. Now let's talk about the floor. It sits below the surrounding ground because the lodge has been built partly into the earth. Not dramatically deep, and certainly not deep enough to qualify as a secret underground kingdom, but low enough that the walls are protected from the worst of the wind. Before the posts went up, and before the roof was covered, the builders cleared and shaped a broad circular space, lowering the living area into the soil. This simple decision changes everything. Outside, cold air races freely across the plains, gathering speed over the open land and striking anything foolish enough to stand upright. Inside, the lower floor avoids much of that direct assault. The earth around the lodge does not become warm in the way the fire does, but it changes temperature far more slowly than the air. It absorbs heat, releases it gradually, and prevents every gust outside from immediately becoming your personal problem. You notice the difference near the entrance. Cold air is heavy. When the door opens, it moves along the floor before slowly spreading through the room. The central fire warms the air above it, while sleeping platforms around the wall keep bedding away from the chilliest layer close to the ground. Nobody has written a report about air circulation. Nobody needs to. Generations of watching smoke, frost, fire, and human discomfort have already completed the research. The floor itself is packed earth, smoothed by use and maintained by the household. It is firm underfoot but never entirely separated from the land outside. Dust rises in dry weather. Dampness must be watched. Small pieces of grass, ash, food, hide and soil collect through ordinary life and are swept away. This is a working floor in a working home, not the polished surface of a museum reconstruction where nobody is permitted to place a cooking pot incorrectly. Beneath it may lie something even more important. Storage pits can be dug into the earth and carefully prepared for dried corn, beans, squash, sunflower seeds, and other foods. Their narrow openings are sealed and sometimes concealed, turning the floor into both foundation and pantry. You may walk across months of stored food without seeing any sign of it. Your household wealth is literally under your feet, which encourages respect for where you stamp when annoyed. The circular shape of the lodge contributes to the same system. There are no exposed corners for the wind to batter, and no long flat walls carrying the full force of a storm. The roof slopes toward the ground, making the whole building resemble a low hill. Snow can gather over it. Wind passes across it. From a distance, the lodge appears less like an object placed on the prairie and more like the prairie has decided to develop a doorway. This is why calling it a hole misses the point. A hole is what you get when something is removed. This space has been considered, reinforced, organized, and made useful. It holds beds, storage, tools, food, a central fire, perhaps a valuable horse, and an extended family trying not to become irritated with one another before breakfast. Every part responds to the climate. By lowering the floor, thickening the walls, rounding the roof, and using the earth itself as protection, the builders have created a shelter that works with the land instead of attempting to overpower it. There is no furnace humming beneath you. There are no sealed windows, thermostat, or insulated concrete panels. There is only timber, soil, fire, and knowledge arranged correctly. You stand in the center and feel the warmth gathering again. Your house is technically a hole. It is still considerably smarter than you are. 3. The women who knew exactly how to build a roof, before this lodge could protect anyone. Before the fire could burn, before food could be hidden beneath the floor, and before a horse could stand near the entrance looking as though it contributed equally to the mortgage, the lodge had to be built. Among the Hidatsa, this knowledge belonged principally to women. Women constructed, owned, and maintained the earth lodges, working together under the direction of an older woman who possessed both the practical and sacred knowledge required to raise one correctly. This was not casual household advice passed around while everyone stared uncertainly at a pile of timber. The supervising woman understood the entire process. She knew where the lodge should stand, how wide it should be, which materials were suitable, and how the weight of the completed roof would travel through the wooden frame. She knew what had to happen first, what could happen later, and which mistake would cause several tons of prairie to arrive indoors without permission. You therefore listened to her. Materials had been gathered well before construction began. Cottonwood trees grew along the river valleys, providing the heavy posts and beams needed for the frame. Willow branches, grasses, and sod would form the outer layers. Some of this work could be easier during winter, when heavy materials could be dragged across snow rather than hauled over bare ground. Building a home began long before the first post entered the soil. It began with knowing what would be needed and making certain it was available at the correct moment. When construction started, women from the clan worked together. Men could help cut, carry and raise the largest timbers, particularly the heavy central posts and beams, but they did so within a building process directed by women. This was skilled communal labour, not one determined man wandering around the site holding a piece of wood and refusing to read instructions. The ground was cleared and shaped into a broad circle. Near the centre, 4 deep holes were prepared for the main cottonwood posts. These had to be spaced carefully because they would support the central framework above the hearth. If the posts leaned badly or stood at uneven distances, every later stage inherited the error. There was no point hoping the willow branches would somehow correct a structural disagreement among several large trees. The posts were raised into place with ropes, strength, coordination, and clear direction. Heavy beams then connected them overhead. A wider ring of shorter posts was arranged nearer the outer wall, and rafters stretched between the central frame and the edge of the lodge. Each new piece distributed the weight more evenly. Slowly, the empty circle became a shelter. Then came layers of smaller willow branches, dried grass, and finally sodden earth. The roof grew heavier with every stage. What looked delicate at first became broad and solid, its rounded surface sloping toward the ground. The earth provided insulation and protection, but only because the wooden frame beneath it had been designed correctly. Throughout the work, younger women watched experienced hands. They carried materials, prepared branches, packed earth, and learned the sequence by participating in it. The knowledge was not stored in a diagram hidden in a cabinet. It lived in memory, demonstration, correction, and repetition. One generation built while the next learned how. When the lodge was completed, the woman who owned it possessed far more than a roof. She held the centre of a household. Her relatives would sleep there, food would be stored there, visitors welcomed, children taught, and ceremonies observed. The lodge represented property, labour, status, continuity, and security shaped into a circular room. You look around at the beams above you. They appear quiet now, darkened by years of smoke, holding the earth exactly where it belongs. The roof looks simple. That is how expertise usually looks after someone else has done all the difficult thinking. 4. 4 central posts hold up your entire winter. Let's look upward. 4 large cottonwood posts stand near the centre of the lodge, darkened by smoke and polished in places by years of hands, ropes, and ordinary household movement. Heavy beams rest across them, forming a square above the central hearth. From this frame, more timbers extend toward a wider ring of shorter posts near the outer edge of the lodge. Rafters then slope downward toward the ground, creating the broad rounded roof that keeps the winter outside and several tons of soil above your head. It is best not to think of this arrangement as 4 logs supporting a field. That is technically what is happening, but phrasing it that way does nothing useful for the nerves. The central posts were selected carefully. Cottonwood is available along the river valleys, where trees grow tall enough to provide the heavy supports required for a large earth lodge. Each post must be strong, reasonably straight, and thick enough to carry part of the roof's immense weight. Once cut and prepared, the timbers are brought to the building site and raised into deep holes in the floor. This requires coordination. A post of this size cannot be lifted politely by 2 people after breakfast. Ropes are attached, groups pull together. Others guide the base into position while the experienced woman directing construction watches the angle and spacing. One careless movement could injure someone or leave the post leaning in a way that becomes increasingly important when the roof begins receiving the weight of the landscape. The 4 posts must stand at the correct distance from one another because the main beams will connect them. These beams form the central frame around the smoke hole and above the hearth. They must rest securely, with their weight transferred downward through the posts and into the earth. No nails hold the entire structure together. There is no delivery of metal brackets accompanied by a small paper diagram and one mysterious spare screw. The lodge depends on fitted timber, careful placement, binding where needed, gravity, and a precise understanding of how the materials behave. Around the central square, a larger circle of shorter posts supports the outer portion of the roof. Long rafters bridge the space between the inner and outer frames. Smaller poles, willow branches, grass and earth will eventually cover them, but at this stage the lodge resembles the enormous wooden ribs of some patient animal waiting to be given skin. The design spreads the load across many supports. No single post carries the whole roof, and no beam is expected to perform an act of individual heroism. The strength comes from the relationship between the pieces. Weight moves from the layers of earth into the rafters, from the rafters into the beams and posts, and from the posts into the ground. It is engineering through cooperation, which is also how the lodge was built and how the household inside it will survive winter. The posts do more than support the roof. They help organize the interior. Sleeping places, storage areas, workspaces, and family belongings occupy the spaces around them. The hearth sits near the center, and movement through the lodge naturally follows the structure. You learn where to walk in darkness, where robes are hung, and where not to place a basket unless you want someone to step into it before sunrise. Among the hidatsa, the central posts could also carry spiritual meaning. The lodge was not understood only as timber arranged for practical shelter. Its form connected the household with family, community, the earth below, and the world above. Offerings might be attached to important posts, acknowledging that the structure protecting the people was part of a larger set of relationships and responsibilities. Years of smoke gradually darken the timber. Heat dries it, seasons place pressure on it, children grow beneath it. Meals are cooked, stories are told, tools are repaired, and storms pass over the roof while the posts remain where they were placed. You glance upward again as the wind moves across the lodge. Nothing creaks, nothing shifts. 4 cottonwood trunks continue holding up your entire winter with the calm professionalism of people who were never asked whether they felt ready. 5. Sod becomes insulation and occasionally part of dinner. Once the wooden skeleton is complete, the lodge still does not look especially inviting. It is a broad framework of cottonwood posts, heavy beams, rafters, and smaller poles, open to the sky and offering approximately the same protection as a very ambitious basket. The important structure is in place, but the wind passes straight through it, the rain enters without slowing down, and snow would settle directly onto the floor. Now the roof must become solid. Smaller willow branches are laid across the rafters, close enough together to support the materials that will follow. The branches bend easily and fill the spaces between the larger poles, creating a woven surface over the wooden frame. More layers may be added where gaps remain. From inside, the ceiling begins to resemble a dense arrangement of ribs, branches, and careful decisions. Over the willow comes dried grass. The grass forms a thick protective layer between the wooden structure and the earth above it. It helps stop loose soil from falling immediately through the branches and onto everyone below. It also reduces drafts and adds insulation. Bundles are spread across the roof until the frame disappears beneath a dry covering. This must be done carefully. A thin patch will allow cold air or moisture to find its way inside. Too much weight placed unevenly may strain the rafters before the entire roof has been completed. The experienced women directing construction know how the materials should overlap, how thick each layer must be, and where the roof requires additional support. Then the earth begins to arrive. Soil and sections of sod are carried or lifted onto the roof and spread across the grass. Each new load makes the structure heavier and the interior darker. What began as an open wooden frame slowly becomes a low, rounded hill. The earth is packed firmly enough to resist wind and weather, but shaped so rain and melting snow can move away from the smoke hole and entrance, rather than gathering above the family with quiet determination. The finished covering can be remarkably thick. It blocks wind far more effectively than a wall of stretched hide and slows the movement of heat through the roof. During winter, warmth from the fire and from the people inside does not immediately vanish into the night. During summer, the same layer of earth helps keep the lodge cooler than the open air. The ground surrounding you has become part of the building. This works because soil changes temperature slowly. A sudden freeze outside does not pass through several layers of sod, grass, willow, and timber at the same speed it would move through a thin wall. The lodge cannot remain warm without a fire, but it gives that fire a much easier task. Instead of trying to heat a structure being attacked from every direction, the hearth warms a sheltered interior wrapped in earth. There are disadvantages. The roof must be maintained. Rain can erode the surface. Grass may begin growing on top. Small animals may investigate it. Water can find weak points, especially after repeated freezing and thawing. Fresh soil and grass must occasionally be added, and damaged sections repaired before a minor drip develops into a household weather system. Small pieces of earth may also fall through the inner layers. Most of the time, this is nothing more than dust drifting down when someone moves above the lodge or when the roof settles slightly. A dry root, a fragment of grass, or a crumb of soil may land on a robe, a basket, or beside the cooking area. Nobody responds with alarm. The roof is made from the ground. Occasionally, the ground wishes to remind you. You learn to cover important containers. You keep food away from obvious gaps. If something small drops into the stew, it may be removed quietly before anyone asks whether the evening meal has acquired minerals. Outside, the lodge now blends into the village landscape. Snow settles over its rounded surface. Wind travels across it instead of slamming into a high wall. From a distance, only the entrance and the smoke rising from the roof reveal that an entire household is living beneath the apparent hill. Inside, the fire burns steadily. The wind remains outside, and dinner contains only a very small amount of architecture. 6. The entrance tunnel picks a fight with the wind. It is time to approach the door, although calling it a door makes the arrangement sound simpler than it is. Between the warm centre of the lodge and the open winter stands a covered wooden passage built into the outer wall. It stretches away from the circular room like a short tunnel, low and narrow compared with the broad space behind you. Earth and grass cover it, while heavy timbers protect the root beneath. The passage is not there to create suspense. It is there because the wind outside has been waiting all morning for somebody to make a mistake. You wrap your robe more tightly and move toward it. The temperature changes before you reach the outer opening. Near the hearth, the air is warm and smoky. Inside the passage, the smell of packed earth and hide becomes sharper, and the light ahead reflects from the snow with a pale blue glare. You hear the storm moving across the village, but the sound reaches you through wood and soil, reduced from a roar to steady pressure. The passage forces the weather to take a less convenient route. Without it, every opening would allow cold air to sweep across the lodge, strike the fire, disturb the smoke, and remind everyone how little stands between comfort and the northern plains. The tunnel slows that exchange. Wind must enter the outer opening, travel through the passage, and then turn around an interior windbreak before reaching the main room. This does not stop the cold completely. It simply makes the cold work for it. The windbreak stands just inside the lodge, interrupting the direct path between the entrance and the hearth. Incoming air is redirected along the edge. Smoke is less likely to be driven back into the living space. Sleeping places remain protected from the worst drafts. The family can open the entrance without immediately converting breakfast into an outdoor event. Beside this area may be the protected corral for a prized hunting or warhorse. The animal receives a sheltered position because it represents wealth, mobility, and hunting success. It also becomes an impressive obstacle when several people enter carrying wood. You squeeze past carefully. The horse watches with the calm expression of someone who knows the architecture was adjusted partly for its benefit. The outer opening must still be managed. A hide or another covering can help close it, but every departure exposes the passage to the weather. Snow gathers around the entrance. Wind pushes loose powder inward. After a storm, someone must clear the opening before the drift hardens, and the household discovers that its carefully designed tunnel has become a storage compartment with relatives inside. Paths between lodges can disappear quickly. A few hours of blowing snow may soften every familiar outline and pile a new wall across the doorway. You shovel and carry the snow away while the wind begins replacing it with admirable commitment. There is no point becoming angry. The weather has nowhere else to be. The passage also helps when people return carrying fuel, water, meat, tools, or snow on their clothing. It creates a boundary between outdoor work and domestic life. You can pause there, shake snow from a robe, adjust a load, and enter without dropping half the prairie beside the hearth. It is not a modern mudroom, but it performs the same duty without containing a decorative bench buried beneath objects nobody has put away. At last, you lift the outer covering. Cold light fills the passage. Wind reaches inside, loses speed, strikes the turn, and fails to invade the lodge with the force it intended. The tunnel has won again. The wind will appeal the decision all day. 7. The central fire is warmth, kitchen, and social network. Let's talk about the fire, because nearly everything inside the lodge arranges itself around it. The hearth sits near the centre of the floor, directly beneath the smoke hole, in the open space framed by the 4 main posts. It is not an ornamental fireplace built against a wall and used twice a year when visitors arrive. It is the working heart of the lodge. Warmth, cooking, light, conversation, repair work, teaching, and much of the household's daily movement gather around it. By morning, the flames have often fallen to glowing coals. Someone kneels beside them, brushes away a thin layer of ash, and adds dry cottonwood. An orange line appears along one edge. Then comes a small flame, followed by the soft crackle of wood beginning to catch. Smoke rises toward the opening above, carrying the smell of yesterday's meals, dried hides, damp clothing, and the lodge itself. You move closer. The difference is immediate. Near the outer wall, the air remains cool. Beside the fire, heat reaches your face and hands while the back of your robe stays cold. You turn slightly, warming one side and then the other, which is the universal method of becoming comfortable without admitting that your legs are freezing. The fire must be managed carefully. Too little fuel, and the lodge cools. Too much, and the room fills with heat and smoke faster than the roof opening can carry it away. Damp wood burns badly and produces thick smoke that hangs beneath the ceiling before drifting into everyone's eyes. Dry wood burns more cleanly, but every piece represents labour. It had to be found, cut, carried, and stored before the storm arrived. Fuel is warmth measured in armfuls. Cooking happens here as well. Pots can be suspended or placed near the flames, and food simmers while other work continues. Corn, beans, squash, dried meat, and fat can become a thick stew that warms the body and stretches stored supplies. Water is heated. Meat is roasted or boiled. Dried food softens again. The fire transforms what has been gathered and preserved into something the household can eat. It also produces light, although not very much. At night, the flames illuminate faces nearest the hearth and leave the edges of the lodge in shadow. The supporting posts appear and disappear as the fire shifts. Sparks rise. Smoke curls overhead. Anyone sewing, scraping a hide, repairing a tool, or sorting food moves close enough to see without getting close enough to set a robe alight. This balance requires experience. Children learn early where they may sit, how to move around the hearth, and why running through the centre of the lodge is a poor decision. Adults pass hot vessels carefully. Bedding, robes, baskets, and dried materials remain away from sparks. The fire is useful because everyone respects what it can do when ignored. The hearth is also where people gather. Winter draws the household inward. Stories are told, plans are discussed, skills are demonstrated. News from another lodge or a visiting trader is repeated and examined. Children listen while pretending not to. Older relatives correct details because apparently the story was told incorrectly last time and civilization depends on repairing this immediately. There is no separate room for conversation. No one withdraws to a lounge after dinner. The same circle serves as kitchen, workshop, classroom, and evening gathering place. The fire connects all of these functions because it provides the warmth and light that make them possible. Outside, the wind crosses the snow and presses against the entrance. Inside, another piece of wood settles into the coals. The flame brightens, and everyone shifts a little closer. Your entire social network is now online. It requires cottonwood. 8. The smoke hole is a chimney with weather problems. Directly above the fire is the smoke hole. It is the one deliberate opening in a roof covered with timber, willow, grass, and earth. Through it, smoke escapes, daylight enters, and the lodge maintains a workable relationship with the central fire. Without this opening, the hearth would warm the room for several minutes before everyone became unable to see, breathe, or continue talking. In calm weather, it works quietly. Heat carries smoke upward from the flames. It gathers beneath the highest part of the roof, curls around the darkened beams, and passes into the open air. A shaft of daylight falls in the opposite direction, illuminating drifting ash in the centre of the floor. You can look up and see a small piece of sky framed by the structure, keeping the rest of the sky away from you. The trouble begins when the weather develops an opinion. A strong wind moving across the roof can disturb the upward flow of smoke. Instead of leaving politely, it spreads sideways beneath the ceiling or drops toward the people sitting around the hearth. Your eyes begin to sting. Someone coughs. A child moves closer to the floor, where the air is clearer. Everyone adjusts position without behaving as though this is unusual, because it is not. The entrance passage and smoke hole must work together. Fresh air enters near the floor, feeds the flames, warms and rises. Smoke follows that moving air toward the roof. If the entrance is sealed too tightly, the fire struggles and the smoke no longer rises cleanly. If it is left too open, cold air pours through the lodge and the household begins heating the northern plains one armful at a time. Then there is snow. During a storm, flakes can descend through the opening and vanish with a hiss near the fire. A little snow is inconvenient. A sustained fall turns the hearth into a confused meeting between winter and breakfast. Rain creates the same problem in a wetter form. The opening cannot simply be closed, because the smoke still needs somewhere to go. One practical solution is to place an overturned bullboat above the hole. A bullboat is a light, round vessel made from a wooden frame covered with bison hide, used for carrying people or goods across the river. Raised on poles over the roof opening, it serves as a weather shield while leaving space around the edges for smoke to escape. Your riverboat has become part of the ventilation system. It has had a varied career. Someone must watch how the cover is positioned. Tilt it incorrectly and the wind may push smoke back inside. Lower it too far and the fire begins producing more smoke than the opening can release. Raise it too high and the snow returns. The adjustment is made through experience, observation, and knowing which direction the weather is currently attempting to ruin your evening. Years of smoke leave their mark. The rafters and central beams darken. Soot gathers on surfaces above the hearth. The smell settles into robes, baskets, hides, and hair. Yet smoke also helps dry materials suspended overhead and can discourage insects from settling among stored possessions. It is irritating, useful, and present in nearly everything, rather like a relative with strong opinions about how the fire should be managed. As evening arrives, the opening becomes a dark circle above the flames. Sparks rise toward it and vanish. Beyond it, the wind continues across the snow while the lodge remains warm beneath the earth. Your chimney has no bricks, metal cap, or professional inspection. It does, however, have a boat on top. 9. Your bedroom contains most of your extended family. Now that there is light, you can see the sleeping arrangement. Beds and raised platforms line the outer wall of the lodge, fitted into the spaces between the supporting posts. Each belongs to part of the extended family living here, although belongs is a flexible word when several children have spent the night migrating beneath robes like warm, determined wildlife. A large earth lodge may shelter 10, 15, or even 20 people. Mothers, daughters, sisters, husbands, children, grandparents, and other relatives share the same circular room. Among the Hidatsa, households often center on women related through the same family line. Husbands join the households of their wives, placing several generations beneath one roof along with food, tools, bedding, sacred possessions, and occasionally a prized horse. The house is spacious by the standards of the village, but 20 people remain 20 people. Sleeping platforms help organize the interior. They raise you above the packed earth floor where the coldest air settles and drafts creep inward from the entrance passage. Wooden frames support layers of hides, mats, and thick buffalo robes. Curtains or hanging hides can partly screen the beds, providing warmth and a modest degree of privacy. The key phrase is modest degree. You cannot close a bedroom door because there is no bedroom and very little door. Instead, privacy depends on fabric, darkness, lowered voices, and everyone agreeing not to become excessively interested in what other people are doing. This is less an architectural feature than a collective social skill. You learn where each person sleeps. You know which platform belongs to the older couple who rise before daylight, which contains the children most likely to whisper after everyone has settled, and which relative snores with such authority that the roof occasionally seems to answer. At night, the fire falls low and the lodge becomes quieter, though never silent. Wood shifts in the hearth. The wind presses against the entrance. Someone coughs through the smoke. A baby wakes and is soothed. The horse moves in its enclosure. Robes rustle as sleeping people turn toward the remaining warmth. Smells collect as easily as sounds. There is wood smoke, hide, earth, stored food, damp moccasins, human breath, and the unmistakable contribution of an animal standing indoors. Nobody sprays anything called winter cedar morning mist. The atmosphere is produced naturally and with considerable commitment. Sharing the lodge has practical advantages. Every person adds body heat. Older relatives can watch children while others work. Skills and information pass constantly between generations. When the weather is dangerous, nobody sleeps alone in a distant room where trouble might go unnoticed. If someone becomes ill, needs help, or hears an unusual sound outside, the household is already present. The arrangement also requires patience. Arguments cannot be escaped by walking upstairs. There is no upstairs. A disagreement may be followed by several hours of sitting on opposite sides of the same fire while pretending to concentrate intensely on separate tasks. Everyone hears when someone complains about the food. Everyone knows when a child has been told twice to settle down. Family news does not travel through the lodge. It simply occurs everywhere at once. As morning strengthens, blankets are folded and sleeping spaces become part of the working household again. People sit on the platforms to sew, mend tools, sort food, and talk. Children move through the gaps between beds and posts. The circular room shifts from bedroom to kitchen, workshop, and meeting place without anyone changing the furniture. You pull the robe from your shoulders and rise carefully, trying not to wake the child who has somehow claimed half your sleeping place. Your home contains almost everyone you are related to. Fortunately, winter has sealed the exits. 10. Buffalo robes. Perform the work of several blankets. Let's get you out of bed. The moment you lift the robe, cold air slips underneath it and reaches every part of you that had been peacefully pretending winter was someone else's problem. The fire is burning again, but its warmth is strongest near the center of the lodge. Along the outer wall, where you have been sleeping, the air remains cooler. You sit up slowly, pull the robe around your shoulders, and immediately understand why nobody is eager to begin the day wearing optimism alone. The robe is made from a carefully prepared bison hide with the hair left on. It is thick, heavy, and extremely good at trapping warmth. In winter, that matters more than elegance. A robe can serve as bedding through the night, a cloak when you rise, and protection when you step outside. Folded beneath you, it softens the sleeping platform. Wrapped around you, it blocks drafts. Shared between several people, it becomes a small domestic peace treaty with fur. Preparing such a hide requires considerable labour. After the animal is butchered, the skin must be cleaned, scraped, stretched, and worked until it becomes flexible enough to use. Fat and tissue are removed from the inner surface. The hide is softened through repeated scraping and handling, then often treated with animal brains or other fatty materials before being smoked. The process is skilled, physical, and time-consuming. Nobody simply removes a robe from a parcel and complains that the colour looked warmer online. Winter hides are especially valuable because the animal's coat is at its thickest. A well-prepared robe may be traded, gifted, used ceremonially, or kept within the household for years. It represents hunting success, women's labour, stored warmth, and a useful object large enough to solve several problems at once. Modern blankets generally refuse to become clothing when required. You draw the robe more tightly as you stand. Beneath it, you may wear garments made from softened hide, including leggings, a shirt or dress, and moccasins. The exact clothing varies by nation, age, gender, activity, and season, but the principle is familiar. Layers hold warm air near the body and prevent the wind from reaching the skin directly. Fur and hide provide protection that thin woven cloth alone cannot offer in severe cold. Moccasins require particular attention. Dry feet are essential. Grass, fur, or additional pieces of hide can be placed inside for insulation, but anything that becomes damp must be changed. Sweat may feel harmless while you are working, yet it becomes dangerous once you stop moving. You therefore dress for the task ahead, rather than for the brief moment beside the fire. This is practical temperature management, achieved without synthetic fibres or a label promising advanced thermal technology. The robe must also be kept dry. Snow can be brushed from the hair before it melts. Damp robes are aired near the fire, though never so close that sparks reach them or heat damages the hide. Smoke settles into the material over time, giving it the same familiar scent carried by the lodge, the bedding, and nearly everyone inside. Nothing smells freshly laundered because laundering a full bison robe would be both impractical and a fascinating way to ruin it. Around you, the rest of the household is also dressing. Children are wrapped, corrected, and wrapped again. Someone searches for a missing moccasin that is eventually found beneath a sleeping relative. An older family member checks the weather through the entrance and returns with an expression suggesting that the outdoors remains committed to its position. You fasten your clothing, settle the heavy robe over your shoulders, and move toward the fire for one final moment of warmth. Several modern blankets would be lighter. None of them could walk outside with you. 11. The best horse has also joined the household. Before breakfast, you notice movement near the entrance. At first, you assume another member of the family is shifting beneath a robe. Then comes a heavy breath, the scrape of a hoof against packed earth, and the unmistakable rustle of an animal large enough to make its opinions structurally relevant. There is a horse inside the lodge. Not every horse receives this treatment. Most remain outside, managed near the village and protected as conditions allow. But an especially valuable hunting or war horse may be kept in a small enclosure beside the entrance passage, where it can be watched closely and sheltered from severe weather, injury, or theft. This animal represents transportation, hunting success, trade, prestige, and possibly the difference between returning from an expedition with meat and returning with a long explanation. It is therefore allowed indoors. The enclosure is positioned near the entrance rather than beside the family beds. This arrangement protects the horse while keeping it close to the outer passage, where it can be led outside without being guided through the entire household. Even so, the space is limited. Anyone carrying firewood, water, food, or equipment through the entrance must pass carefully between timber supports, stored objects, and an animal that may suddenly decide the doorway belongs entirely to it. You approach slowly. The horse turns its head and watches you. It has been awake longer than you have and appears disappointed by your performance so far. Keeping such an animal inside brings practical benefits. Its body gives off heat. The lodge protects it from the worst wind and snow. Its condition can be checked throughout the night. If it becomes restless, injured, or ill, someone notices quickly. A prized horse cannot simply be replaced when spring arrives. It has been trained, handled, and trusted, and its abilities may be known as carefully as those of any skilled hunter. There are, however, atmospheric consequences. The lodge already smells of smoke, hides, earth, dried food, damp clothing, and a large extended family beginning its day. The horse adds breath, hair, trampled grass, and several less poetic contributions. These are managed because they must be. Bedding and food remain separated from the enclosure. The packed earth floor can be cleaned. Fresh material may be placed beneath the animal. The entrance allows some air movement, although no one would describe the result as mountain fresh. The horse must also be fed and watered. Stored grass or other fodder is precious during winter, when grazing becomes difficult beneath deep snow. Water has to be carried or produced by melting snow, which consumes both time and firewood. The animal is protected because it is valuable, but that protection adds work to a household already performing a remarkable amount of work before anyone has eaten. Children know not to crowd it. Adults move with familiar caution. A horse startled inside an earth lodge has very few graceful directions in which to go. The support posts cannot move aside. The sleeping platforms cannot retreat. The cooking fire is emphatically not part of the exit route. The animal is therefore handled calmly. Its owner speaks to it, checks its legs, and examines the hide for signs of injury. The horse shifts again, releasing a cloud of warm breath into the colder air near the passage. For a moment, the two of you stand together listening to the wind outside. The arrangement may look strange from a modern perspective, but modern people regularly build heated rooms for cars and then leave themselves to scrape ice from the windscreen before work. The principle is similar. Protect the valuable transportation, except that it occupies an unreasonable amount of space. Someone begins preparing breakfast near the central fire. You squeeze past the enclosure and return to the warmer centre of the lodge. Behind you, the horse settles comfortably. It has shelter, food, security, and several people attending to its needs. So far, it is having the best winter of anyone here. 12. Dawn chores begin before you feel emotionally prepared. It is morning now, although the sun has barely reached the entrance passage. Inside the lodge, the fire has been restored from its overnight coals, and the household is already moving around you. Robes are folded. Sleeping platforms become seats and workspaces again. Children are encouraged toward useful tasks with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Near the entrance, the horse shifts in its enclosure, apparently pleased that everyone else has finally joined it in being awake. You would prefer a few quiet moments beside the fire. Winter has reviewed this request and rejected it. The first task is keeping the hearth alive. Someone adds dry cottonwood, adjusts the burning pieces, and watches the smoke rise toward the opening above. The fire must warm the lodge, heat water, and prepare food, which means it cannot be treated as background decoration. Every flame consumes fuel that was gathered and carried before the storm. Nothing is added carelessly. Another person checks the entrance passage. Snow may have blown inside during the night or gathered around the outer opening. If the drift becomes too deep, leaving the lodge will require digging upward through it, which is an exciting architectural feature nobody requested. The passage must be cleared while the snow is still loose enough to move. You pull on your moccasins and wrap a robe around your shoulders. The warm air near the hearth vanishes as you approach the entrance. Cold gathers along the floor, and a strip of pale morning light appears ahead. When the covering is lifted, the wind enters immediately, rushing down the passage with the confidence of someone who believes it has finally been invited. Outside, the village is still partly hidden beneath the storm's work. Snow lies over the rounded lodges, softening their outlines until they resemble low white hills with smoke rising from them. Paths used yesterday have disappeared. Footprints begin again from every doorway as families check their wood, animals, storage areas, and neighbours. You help clear the entrance. Each load of snow is moved aside, and the wind begins returning some of it before you have finished. This is not discouraging so much as clarifying. The weather has set the terms of the relationship. You will work, and it will pretend not to notice. Back inside, water must be considered. If liquid water has been stored safely, it is brought toward the fire. Otherwise, snow may be melted, which requires filling a vessel repeatedly because an impressive mound of snow produces an amount of water normally associated with disappointment. Fuel must then be spent heating it. Food is retrieved and prepared. Corn may be pounded or boiled. Dried squash can be softened. Beans, meat, or fat may be added to a pot. Breakfast is not separate from the rest of the morning's work. It simmers while tools are checked, clothing repaired, children directed, and plans discussed. The weather determines what happens next. A calm morning may allow trips for wood, water, or fodder. A hard wind may keep most people close to the lodge. Hunters consider conditions before travelling. Those caring for the household calculate fuel, food, and the needs of everyone inside. There is no forecast beyond the colour of the sky, the direction of the smoke, the feel of the air, and the accumulated judgment of people who know this landscape. Older children help with manageable work. They carry small pieces of wood, tend younger siblings, fetch objects, and learn by following adults through the morning. Nobody gives them a brightly coloured chart with a sticker for completing their responsibilities. Their reward is that the lodge continues functioning. By the time food is ready, you have cleared snow, checked the fire, carried fuel, helped with water, and become fully awake against your will. You settle near the hearth with the rest of the household as steam rises from the pot. The sun is finally above the village. You have already completed half a day. 13. Firewood is the real winter currency. Let's talk about fuel, because the fire at the centre of the lodge cannot survive on admiration. It needs wood, and during a northern winter, wood is not merely something you burn. It is stored heat, cooked food, melted water, dried clothing, and another night in which the household remains comfortably separate from the weather outside. Every piece has reached the hearth through labour. Along the upper Missouri, cottonwood grows in the river valleys, providing timber for lodge construction and fuel for household fires. Fallen branches, deadwood and driftwood can be gathered from wooded areas near the water. Larger pieces may need to be cut, split, dragged or carried back toward the village. None of this becomes easier because the temperature has fallen. The cold simply watches the work with professional interest. You step outside with a robe wrapped around your shoulders. Snow presses beneath your moccasins, and your breath hangs briefly in the air. The river valley is quiet except for the wind moving through bare branches and the distant sound of wood striking wood. Other members of the village are already gathering fuel, checking stored piles or moving loads toward the lodges. The best firewood is dry. Wet wood burns reluctantly, smokes heavily, and forces everyone inside to participate in its personal difficulties. Dead branches sheltered from deep moisture are useful, as is wood collected and stored before the worst weather arrives. Planning matters. Waiting until a blizzard begins to consider the fuel supply is a strategy most households attempt only once. Bundles can be carried on the back or pulled over snow using a travois or sled-like arrangement. Frozen ground and snow sometimes make heavy loads easier to drag than they would be across mud or summer grass. This is one of winter's rare administrative concessions. The material remains heavy, but at least the landscape has become temporarily smoother. Back at the lodge, the wood must be stored where it stays reasonably dry and remains accessible. A large outdoor pile may be protected near the entrance, while smaller amounts are kept inside for immediate use. Nobody wants to leave the lodge during a storm because the fire has consumed the final branch. That is the historical equivalent of discovering the phone battery is at 1%, except the phone is responsible for preventing hypothermia. Fuel use requires judgment. A large fire warms the lodge quickly but consumes the supply faster. A smaller fire conserves wood, but may not provide enough heat for cooking, melting snow, drying garments, or warming everyone gathered around it. The household adjusts the flames according to the weather and the work being done. Cottonwood does not always burn as long or as hot as denser woods, so the fire needs attention. Coals are protected overnight beneath ash, allowing the hearth to be revived in the morning without starting completely again. Someone wakes, uncovers the glow, adds dry material, and waits for the first flame. The success of this moment depends partly on yesterday's gathering. Even water has a fuel cost. Snow must be melted and then warmed. Dried corn and beans require cooking. Damp moccasins need careful drying. Hides being worked may need warmth. Every ordinary task quietly removes another piece from the pile. You begin to see the wood differently. An armful is not a random collection of branches. It is breakfast, several pots of water, and part of the coming night. A larger stack represents days of security. A shrinking one changes plans. You place another piece on the coals. Flame moves along the bark, and warmth spreads across your hands. There are no coins in circulation around the hearth, only cottonwood, and everyone knows exactly what it is worth. 14. Water has become a heavy solid object. Now you need water, which would normally be a simple statement. The river lies nearby. Snow covers almost everything. Ice exists in quantities that seem almost boastful. Unfortunately, none of this water is currently behaving in a form you can conveniently drink. During warmer months, the Missouri and its tributaries provide water for the village, gardens, animals, cooking, and daily work. In winter, the rivers do not disappear, but they become considerably less cooperative. Ice seals much of the surface, snow covers the banks, and every journey down toward the water involves cold, weight, and the possibility of discovering that the path is much steeper than you remembered. You wrap your robe tightly and carry a vessel toward the river. The snow compresses beneath your moccasins with a dry creak. Smoke rises from the earth lodges behind you, bending sideways in the wind. The village appears warm from a distance, which is an unnecessarily persuasive illusion when you are the person walking away from it. A place in the ice may already have been opened and maintained by the community. Even then, it must be checked and cleared. Thin ice around the opening is dangerous, while fresh freezing may seal the surface again overnight. Someone breaks through the new layer carefully, keeping away from the unstable edge. Black water appears beneath the white ice, moving slowly and looking colder than any liquid has a moral right to look. The vessel is lowered and filled. Then you lift it. Water is heavy. This fact is less noticeable when it travels through a pipe and appears obediently from a tap. It becomes extremely noticeable when you must carry every drop uphill through snow. The container pulls against your arms. Water shifts with each step, attempting to escape over the rim after you have done all the work of retrieving it. Back inside the lodge, the vessel is placed near the central fire. The water may be used for cooking, drinking, washing, or caring for the horse. Each purpose competes with the others because the supply is not unlimited. Nobody leaves the tap running while considering an unrelated personal matter. When reaching the river is unsafe or impractical, snow can be melted instead. At first, this appears wonderfully convenient. Snow is everywhere. You fill a pot with it, place the pot near the fire, and wait. The snow collapses. A vessel that appeared completely full produces a shallow amount of water at the bottom. You add more. It collapses again. Soon you are feeding snow into the pot with the steady concentration of someone attempting to fill a bath using handfuls of cloud. The process also consumes firewood. Snow must first be melted, then the resulting water must be warmed. Every pot represents fuel gathered earlier and time spent tending the fire. Clean snow may provide useful water, but it is not free. Winter has merely divided the cost between your back and the woodpile. Stored water must be protected from freezing near the colder outer wall. Containers are kept closer to the warmth, but not where they interfere with movement or cooking. A spilled vessel is more than an inconvenience. It means lost labour, wet flooring, and another trip outside. Everyone reacts to the sound of sloshing water with the alert attention modern people reserve for a glass placed near a laptop. By the time the water is warm, you have carried it, guarded it, heated it, and silently calculated who needs it most. Steam rises from the vessel and disappears into the smoky air above the hearth. Outside, the landscape contains water in every direction. Inside, you have one pot. Winter has made hydration a group project. 15. Breakfast comes out of the floor. It is breakfast, and the good news is that months of food are waiting beneath your feet. The less reassuring news is that retrieving breakfast requires opening a concealed hole in the floor which feels like an unnecessarily dramatic beginning to porridge. Near the edge of the lodge, someone clears away the covering from a narrow circular opening. Beneath it lies a cache pit dug deep into the earth. The chamber widens below the neck, forming a bell shape large enough to hold a substantial supply of dried food while keeping the entrance small and easier to seal. Its walls have been carefully prepared. Grass, willow, mats, hides, or other protective materials separate the contents from damp soil. Once filled, the opening can be closed and disguised beneath the packed floor. A visitor might walk directly across the household's winter supply without realizing that several months of corn are quietly judging their footsteps. Women oversee these stores because the gardens, harvest, processing, and preservation of crops are central parts of women's work among the Mandan and Hidatsa. The food below you did not appear because autumn was feeling generous. Fields had to be prepared. Seeds were selected and planted. Corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers were tended through the growing season, protected from animals, gathered at the correct time, and prepared for storage before freezing weather arrived. Breakfast has been under construction since spring. A container is lowered into the pit, or someone reaches carefully through the opening to retrieve what is needed. Dried corn comes up first, followed perhaps by beans, strips of squash, or sunflower seeds. The cache is opened only as long as necessary. Every unnecessary minute exposes the contents to moisture, pests, and cold air. The opening is then covered again, returning the floor to its ordinary appearance. The corn still requires work. Some kernels may already have been parched, but others must be pounded in a wooden mortar, ground into meal, or boiled until soft. The steady knock of the pestle joins the sounds of the lodge. Wood crackles in the hearth. A child whispers near the sleeping platforms. The horse moves beside the entrance. Someone begins a conversation before you have eaten, demonstrating that this particular morning hardship is timeless. Water is placed near the fire, and the food is added. Cornmeal can become a thick porridge. Whole kernels may be boiled with beans, squash, dried meat, or fat. Sunflower seeds can be crushed or added for richness. The meal is simple, warming, and dense enough to support hours of work in cold conditions. It also takes time. Dried corn does not respond to impatience. Beans are even less sympathetic. They soften according to their own schedule while the fire consumes wood and the household continues working around them. Breakfast is not something you unwrap while leaving the lodge. It is a negotiation between stored food, heated water, fuel, and whoever remembered to begin the pot early enough. The smell gradually fills the room. Steam rises through the smoke, carrying the warm scent of corn and meat. Wooden bowls are prepared. Children begin watching the pot with an intensity they have not shown toward any chore. The adults continue working as though they are not also calculating how long remains before the food is ready. When it is finally served, you sit near the hearth and hold the warm bowl between your hands. The meal contains the labour of an entire village season. It carries sunlight from the gardens, smoke from drying fires, and the careful judgment of the women who knew exactly how much food the household would need. Outside, snow covers the fields where these crops once grew. Inside, summer has returned from beneath the floor. It tastes considerably better than the architecture. 16. Bell-shaped cache pits. Protect the household's wealth. Let's examine the cache properly. Because what looks like a narrow opening in the floor is actually one of the most important structures in the lodge. Beneath that small entrance, the pit widens into a rounded chamber, rather like an enormous buried jar. The narrow neck makes it easier to seal, while the broader space below can hold a considerable quantity of dried food. It is an elegant design, although elegance is probably not the first word that occurs to you while kneeling beside a dark hole full of corn. The pit has been dug carefully into firm ground. Its sides must hold their shape, and the chamber must be deep enough to protect the contents from sudden temperature changes. Once the excavation is complete, the interior is prepared with layers of dry grass, willow branches, mats, hides, or bark. These materials prevent the food from resting directly against damp soil and create a cleaner, more stable storage space. Moisture is the enemy. A little water entering the cache can spoil months of food. Corn may mould, seeds may rot, dried squash can soften in all the wrong ways. The pit is therefore filled only after the contents have been properly dried and the chamber has been inspected. Nothing goes underground simply because everyone has become tired of looking at it. The largest share of the cache may be corn. Different varieties mature at different times and serve different purposes, allowing the household to spread the risks of the growing season. Beans, dried squash, sunflower seeds, and gathered foods such as wild turnips can also be stored. Dried meat may be kept elsewhere or added when conditions are suitable, but the cultivated harvest forms the dependable centre of the winter supply. These foods are more than breakfast ingredients. They are the household's savings. Every basket represents gardens planted months earlier, weeds removed, crops protected, harvests gathered, and long hours spent drying, shelling, slicing, sorting, and carrying. If the cache remains full, the household can face winter with confidence. If it begins emptying too quickly, every bowl served near the fire becomes part of a calculation nobody particularly wants to discuss. Some cache pits are located inside the lodge. Others may be dug outside and concealed within or near the village. An outdoor cache can protect food if a lodge is damaged, abandoned, or threatened, while concealment makes the store difficult for strangers to find. Once the pit is filled, its opening is closed with layers of grass, wood, earth, and packed soil. The surface is smoothed until it appears ordinary. This creates a peculiar domestic situation in which someone may be standing directly above a family's wealth while having no idea it exists. The location must therefore be remembered precisely. There are no painted labels reading winter corn or emergency sunflowers. Knowledge of the cache belongs to the women who created and maintained it, passed through careful instruction rather than advertised to anyone walking through the village with suspicious enthusiasm. When food is needed, the opening is uncovered without disturbing more of the seal than necessary. A person reaches or lowers a container into the chamber, removes the required amount, checks for dampness or spoilage, and closes the pit again. The supply is not left open while everyone debates the evening meal. Cold air, insects, mice, and moisture are all extremely interested in joining the household economy. Rodents are especially persistent. A mouse does not respect agricultural expertise or property rights. It simply understands that someone has gathered several thousand meals into one convenient underground room. Linings must be maintained, openings sealed firmly, and any sign of intrusion addressed quickly. As winter progresses, the level inside the cache slowly falls. The change is watched. Portions may be adjusted. Hunting success may supplement the remaining crops, while trade or assistance between relatives can help a household facing difficulty. Food security does not rest entirely on one pit, but the pit is a crucial part of a much larger system of gardens. Hunting, exchange, preservation, and shared responsibility. You look into the dark chamber beneath the floor. It contains no coins, jewellery, or documents proving ownership. It contains corn, beans, squash, and the ability to reach spring. Nobody here is confused about which is more valuable. 17. Summer is waiting underground in the form of corn. Now the stored food begins to emerge, and with it comes an entire vanished season. Outside, snow lies across the gardens. The riverbanks are frozen, the grasses have collapsed beneath the wind, and the village appears surrounded by a world that has stopped producing anything edible. Yet beneath the lodge floor are corn, beans, dried squash, sunflower seeds, and gathered roots, all preserved during warmer months for exactly this moment. Winter has buried the landscape. The household has buried summer first. Corn forms the centre of the supply. Mandan and Hidatsa women cultivated several varieties, selecting seeds suited to the short growing season and the conditions along the upper Missouri. Some corn matured earlier, reducing the danger that frost would arrive before the crop was ready. Other varieties differed in colour, texture, flavour, and use. Seed selection was not casual. The success of next year's gardens depended on saving kernels from plants that had performed well this year. The dried ears brought from the cache still require attention. Husks are removed. Kernels are shelled by hand and sorted. Some may have been parched before storage, allowing them to be eaten directly or carried during travel. Others will be boiled, pounded into meal, or added to soups and stews. You take up a wooden pestle and begin working the corn in a mortar. The rhythm is steady. Lift, strike, turn, and strike again. The kernels crack, then gradually become coarse meal. Fine dust rises around your hands. Across the lodge, someone else slices dried squash into a pot, while another person examines beans retrieved from the cache. Breakfast was only recently finished, but food preparation has already begun again because meals do not appear automatically simply because everyone agrees they would be useful. The squash looks less impressive than it did in summer. It has been cut into rings or strips and dried until much of its moisture disappeared, leaving pieces that are light, tough, and easily stored. Once placed in hot water, however, they soften and return some of their sweetness to the meal. They are summer reduced to something that resembles curled leather, which is not excellent advertising but is very effective preservation. Beans add substance and nutrition, although they take time to soften. They may be boiled alongside corn and squash, absorbing flavours from meat or fat added to the pot. The combination produces a filling meal capable of supporting work in severe cold. It is not assembled from whatever happens to be left in a cupboard. The ingredients were cultivated to complement one another both in the garden and in the cooking pot. Sunflowers contribute another valuable food. Their seeds can be eaten, ground, or crushed to release their oil. This richness matters during winter, when the body requires energy simply to remain warm. A small quantity of oil or crushed seed changes a plain dish and adds calories that will be spent carrying wood, clearing snow, hauling water, or walking against the wind. Wild foods extend the harvest. Prairie turnips and other roots can be gathered, sliced, dried, and braided or stored for later use. Berries may also be dried when available. These foods connect the household not only to cultivated gardens, but to remembered gathering places across the surrounding landscape. Every item emerging from the cache carries a history of work. The soil was prepared, seeds were planted, gardens were tended through heat, insects, storms, and animals that had noticed the crops without being invited. The harvest was collected, sorted, dried, and protected. Women judged which foods should be eaten first, which would store longest, and which seeds must remain untouched for planting. You look at the handful of corn before it enters the pot. It is not merely food, it is planning made edible. Outside, the gardens are invisible beneath the snow. Inside, their harvest simmers beside the fire, filling the lodge with the smell of corn, squash, and several months of successful preparation. Summer has returned. It has simply become much easier to chew. 18. Corn requires a disturbing amount of continued attention. Let's talk about processing, because harvesting corn does not mean corn has finished occupying your schedule. By the time the ears enter the lodge, you've already planted the seeds, protected the young plants, tended the garden, watched the sky for damaging weather, discouraged hungry animals, and gathered the crop before the first severe frost. Modern logic suggests that the work should now be complete. Corn disagrees. The ears must be sorted according to condition and purpose. Some are kept for immediate use. Others are dried for winter storage. The finest kernels from dependable plants may be saved as seed for the next growing season, which means they must be protected from hunger now so that the household can eat many months from now. Consuming your planting seed during a difficult winter may solve today's problem while arranging a much larger one for spring. The husks are pulled back or removed, and the ears are placed where air and warmth can reach them. Corn may be hung, spread on drying platforms, or arranged near enough to the fire for smoke and heat to help remove moisture without scorching the kernels. Every ear must dry thoroughly before it enters a cache. Moist corn stored underground becomes mouldy corn, and mouldy corn is simply agricultural labour returning in the form of an insult. Once dry, the kernels still cling firmly to the cob. You loosen them by hand, rub one ear against another, or use a shelling tool suited to the task. The kernels fall into a hide, basket, or container beneath you with a steady rattle. Children may assist once they are old enough to distinguish useful work from spreading corn across the entire floor. This distinction develops gradually. The empty cobs are not necessarily useless. Depending on need, they may become fuel or serve other practical purposes. Nothing that required months to grow is dismissed casually, because it has stopped looking important. The shelled corn is sorted again. Damaged kernels are removed. Seed corn remains separate. Food intended for travel may be parched, making it lighter, easier to carry, and ready to eat without long cooking. Other kernels are stored whole and processed only when required. When the household needs meal, you place the corn in a wooden mortar and take up the pestle. Then the pounding begins. Lift. Strike. Turn the grain. Strike again. The sound travels through the lodge, joining the fire, conversation, scraping tools, moving children, and the occasional contribution from the horse near the entrance. The work looks simple until your shoulders begin explaining that it is not. Producing a bowl of meal requires repeated blows, careful rhythm, and enough time to reconsider every casual relationship you have ever had with bread. The crushed corn may be sifted or used coarsely, depending on the dish. It can become porridge, thicken a stew, or be combined with beans, squash, meat, and fat. Whole kernels require longer boiling, which consumes water and firewood. Parched corn can be pounded into a portable meal for hunters and travellers. The same crop becomes several foods because the household knows how to change its form according to need. Even after processing, corn continues demanding attention. Stored supplies must be checked for dampness, insects, and rodents. Cache openings must remain sealed. Portions must be judged carefully as winter advances. The household needs enough food for daily meals, emergencies, visitors, ceremonies, journeys, and spring planting. You look at the kernels scattered before you. Each one is small, quiet, and apparently harmless. Together, they have occupied the garden, the drying platform, the storage pit, the cooking pot, and most of your morning. Corn has successfully become the centre of village life. It has also invented paperwork without using paper. 19. Meat and fat. Decide whether dinner is merely large or useful. Now the pot needs meat. Because corn, beans, and squash can carry you a long way. But winter asks more of the body than ordinary hunger. Every trip for wood, every walk through snow, and every hour spent outside in the wind consumes energy. A bowl can be full, and still fail to provide enough of what you need. This is where meat, and even more importantly, fat begin to matter. Among the Mandan and Hidatsa, bison hunting supplied enormous quantities of food when it succeeded. Deer, elk, and smaller animals also contributed according to season and opportunity. Fresh meat could be roasted or boiled, but a large kill produced far more than one household could eat immediately. The rest had to be cut into thin strips, dried, smoked, or otherwise preserved before spoilage began. This work starts quickly. The animal is butchered, and useful portions are separated with care. Meat is sliced thin so air and smoke can reach it. Strips may be hung on drying racks outside during suitable weather, or placed where warmth and smoke help remove moisture. In severe cold, frozen meat can remain stable for a time, but winter is not a refrigerator with a reliable door. Temperatures change, animals investigate, people travel. Preservation still matters. Nothing useful is discarded casually. Organs, marrow, sinew, hide, bone, and fat all have value. The animal has provided food, clothing, tools, containers, cordage, and materials for trade or ceremony. You do not remove two preferred cuts and then stand back while the rest becomes someone else's administrative problem. Fat deserves particular respect. Lean meat provides protein, but a diet consisting only of very lean meat can leave the body short of the energy it needs. In bitter weather, fat gives concentrated calories and helps make stored foods far more sustaining. It can be added to stews, eaten with dried meat, or combined with other ingredients in preparations designed for travel and storage. A small amount changes the entire pot. Dried corn and beans swell in the hot water. Squash softens. Meat adds flavour and substance, but fat gives the meal the richness that tells your body it has received something serious. The surface of the stew shines near the fire. Steam carries the smell through the lodge, and several children begin appearing beside the hearth with no memory of being cooled. The meat itself may require long cooking. Dried strips are tough because removing moisture is precisely what made them last. They must be pounded, cut, soaked, or simmered until they become easier to chew. This takes water, firewood, and patience. 3 household resources that are always being spent somewhere. The pot therefore remains over the fire while other work continues. Someone repairs a moccasin, someone sorts corn, someone checks the entrance for drifting snow. You stir occasionally and discover that the beans remain committed to their original texture. Hunting success affects more than one meal. A good supply of dried meat and fat gives the household security through storms and periods when hunting becomes difficult. A poor season means greater dependence on stored crops, trade, relatives, and careful rationing. Food can be shared through family and community relationships because survival has never been a purely individual project. At last, the stew is served in wooden bowls. It is hot, thick, and heavy enough to support the work still waiting beyond the lodge. You eat slowly beside the central fire while the wind moves over the earth-covered roof. The bowl is large. The fat is what makes it useful. Winter, like a modern gym instructor, has opinions about your macros. 20. The village is an engine, not a collection of huts. Step outside for a moment and look across the village. Because the lodge you have been sheltering inside is only one part of a much larger system. Rounded earth-covered roofs rise from the snow in every direction, each with smoke drifting from its central opening. Paths connect entrances, storage areas, workspaces, animal enclosures, and the open spaces where people gather when the weather allows. From a distance, the village may resemble a cluster of low hills. Up close, it is a town. At the large Mandan and Hidatsa settlements along the Missouri and Knife Rivers, dozens and sometimes more than 100 earth lodges could stand together. Hundreds of people lived within these communities. Families worked in separate households, but no lodge existed entirely on its own. Food, labour, news, protection, ceremony, trade, and family relationships moved constantly between them. You follow a packed path through the snow. It is narrow because repeated footsteps have hardened the centre while fresh drifts rise along the sides. People pass carrying wood, water, baskets, hides, tools, and food. Children move between lodges on errands, though some appear to be following routes of their own invention. Dogs search hopefully around cooking areas, maintaining the ancient canine belief that all human activity will eventually produce something edible. The village has been positioned carefully. The nearby river provides water, timber, transport, fish, and fertile ground for gardens. The surrounding plains connect the community to hunting territories and travel routes. Bluffs, ravines, and bends in the river may offer shelter or defensive advantages. This is not simply a pleasant spot where several families happen to stop. The location supports an entire economy. Beyond the lodges lie garden fields cultivated principally by women. In warmer seasons, these fields produce corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers. Drying racks, storage pits, and work areas help process the harvest before winter. Hunters bring meat and hides into the village. Craftspeople turn bone, wood, stone, hide, clay, and plant fibers into tools and household objects. Traders arrive carrying materials from places far beyond the horizon. A single lodge may hold its own food, but the village provides resilience. If one household suffers a poor harvest, loses stored supplies, or faces illness, relatives and neighbours may help. Large jobs can be shared. A lodge can be built by many hands. A successful hunt can feed more than the hunters who made it. Information about weather, animals, visitors, and distant events spreads quickly because people are always moving between homes. There is also protection in numbers. Some villages are surrounded by ditches, embankments, or wooden palisades. Entrances and paths can be watched. Horses and stored food remain valuable enough to attract danger. And neighbouring nations, raiding parties, or unfamiliar visitors must be approached with judgment. The village is welcoming when hospitality is appropriate and difficult to surprise when it is not. You begin to notice how every structure supports another. The river provides cottonwood for the lodge, frames and fuel for their fires. The lodges protect the people who cultivate the gardens. The gardens produce food stored in pits beneath the lodges. Hunting supplies meat, robes, tools, and trade goods. Trade brings horses, metal objects, cloth, weapons, and news. Family networks organize the labor that keeps all of it moving. Nothing here is random. Even the open central spaces have purpose. They may host meetings, public activities, dances, ceremonies, games, and the ordinary social life of the village. A person can step from the quiet interior of a lodge into a community that is agricultural, commercial, political, spiritual, and extremely aware of everyone else's business. That final function requires no special building. As evening approaches, smoke thickens above the roofs. People return with fuel and water. Food begins simmering. Children are called indoors. The settlement seems to contract, each household drawing back toward its own hearth while remaining connected to every other fire glowing beneath the snow. You look across the earth-covered roofs once more. These are not scattered huts. This is an engine, and everyone in it knows which part you are supposed to be carrying. 21. Winter turns the lodge into a workshop and school. Back inside, the winter day continues. The fire burns steadily beneath the smoke hole, and the lodge has changed again. At dawn it was a bedroom. During breakfast it became a kitchen. Now sleeping robes are folded aside, tools appear near the hearth, and almost every open space becomes part of the day's work. Winter does not stop labour. It moves more of it indoors. A woman sits near the fire working a hide. The skin has already been cleaned, stretched and scraped, but it must be softened through repeated handling before it can become clothing, bedding, a container, or part of another useful object. She draws a tool across the surface with steady pressure. The sound is dry and rhythmic, joining the crackle of the fire and the low conversation moving around the lodge. Nearby, another person repairs a moccasin. A worn seam is examined, the damaged section trimmed, and sinew thread pulled through holes made with an awl. This is not a minor cosmetic repair. A gap in footwear allows snow and moisture inside, and wet feet in bitter weather can become dangerous quickly. The moccasin must be ready before the next trip outside. There is no shop where you can replace it. The shop is currently sitting beside the fire. Tools also need attention. Stone, bone, antler, wood and metal objects are sharpened, straightened, fitted with new handles or prepared for future work. A damaged bowstring cannot remain a problem until hunting season. A cracked container must be repaired before it loses food or water. Nets, ropes, bags and bindings are checked because small weaknesses become much larger inconveniences when you are several miles from the village. Children watch all of this. Their education does not begin when an adult announces that a lesson is about to start. It happens continuously. A child learns how much pressure to place on a scraper by seeing an older relative use one. You learn where to position your hands by being corrected when they are wrong. You begin with small tasks, repeat them, and receive more responsibility when you show that you can complete them without damaging the material or yourself. This system contains very few certificates. It contains immediate feedback. You may be asked to sort corn, carry a small bundle of fuel, hold part of a hide, watch a younger child, or retrieve a tool whose location everyone assumes you know. At first, the work is simple. Over time, it becomes more demanding. Knowledge enters through the eyes, hands, ears, and memory long before anyone separates it into subjects. Older relatives teach through stories as well as demonstration. Around the fire, they recall journeys, hunts, family histories, agreements, ceremonies, unusual winters, and the behavior expected between relatives. A story may explain where a family came from, why a place matters, or what happened when someone ignored excellent advice and created enough trouble to remain educational for several generations. Humor helps the lesson remain memorable. So does embarrassment. The lodge also teaches patience. Hide work cannot be rushed simply because you are tired of scraping. Corn does not become meal because you have struck it 3 enthusiastic times. A tool repaired badly will fail when it is needed. Children learn that skill is built through repetition, observation, and accepting correction without collapsing into a personal crisis. Meanwhile, the adults continue talking. News from other households is discussed. Plans are made for hunting, trade, ceremonies, repairs, and the coming planting season. The long winter day gives people time to prepare for work that will begin when the snow retreats. By late afternoon, the lodge contains finished repairs, softened hides, sorted food, tired children, and several new skills that did not exist at sunrise. Outside, the fields are frozen. Inside, the next season is already being built. 22. Dressing for winter requires more than one impressive robe. Let's get dressed to go outside, because the woodpile will not approach the door voluntarily, and the air beyond the entrance passage is cold enough to make exposed skin immediately reconsider its choices. The buffalo robe around your shoulders is excellent while you are sitting near the fire, but going outside requires more than wrapping yourself in one magnificent hide and hoping enthusiasm will protect the ankles. You begin with the clothing closest to the body. Softened hide garments provide a strong base against the cold. Depending on your age, role, nation, and the work ahead, these may include a shirt or dress, leggings, breechcloth, and other fitted pieces designed to protect the skin while still allowing you to move. The clothing is practical, but practical does not mean carelessly made. Hide must be cleaned, scraped, softened, cut, sewn, and repaired by people who understand exactly how the material behaves. A badly placed seam can rub the skin during a long journey. A loose opening allows wind to enter. Clothing that restricts movement becomes dangerous when you are climbing a riverbank, carrying wood, or attempting to control a horse that has suddenly discovered a powerful interest in another direction. Over the first layers come additional hide, fur, or woven coverings. Leggings protect the lower body from cold, snow, brush, and rough ground. Sleeves and overlapping pieces reduce gaps where wind can reach the skin. The robe is then wrapped around everything, creating a movable wall of warm air between you and the plains. The important word is wrap. You do not simply drape it attractively over one shoulder as though posing for a painting. You pull it close, adjust the edges, and secure it well enough that a gust cannot open the entire arrangement at the first opportunity. Winter has no respect for dramatic silhouettes. Your feet require even more attention. Moccasins are flexible and useful, but winter conditions demand insulation. Dry grass, fur, additional hide, or other soft material can be placed inside to trap warmth around the feet. Extra layers may be worn when snow is deep or the journey is long. Everything must remain dry. Snow that enters the moccasin melts from body heat. Sweat collects during heavy work. Once you stop moving, that moisture cools, and feet that felt warm several minutes earlier become numb with alarming speed. Damp insulation must be removed and replaced. Moccasins are dried carefully near the fire, close enough to warm but not close enough to shrink, harden, or begin producing smoke of their own. This is why dressing for winter is not simply about wearing the thickest possible clothing. You must also avoid becoming too warm while working. Carrying wood through snow raises the body temperature. If you begin to sweat heavily beneath the robe, the dampness remains with you when the work stops. You therefore adjust layers as you move. The robe may be loosened during hard labour and drawn tight again while resting. Gloves or mittens protect the hands, but they must still allow you to grip tools and carry loads. A fur cap or hood protects the head and ears, where the wind seems to arrive with particular personal resentment. Around you, the household performs the same preparations. A child's clothing is checked twice because children insist they are warm until the exact moment they are not. An older relative examines a seam and repairs it before anyone leaves. Someone searches for a missing moccasin that is eventually discovered beneath a folded robe, where it has contributed nothing all morning. At last, you are ready. You step into the entrance passage, carrying tools and wrapped in several layers of hide, fur, grass, and accumulated experience. The cold reaches for you when the outer covering lifts, but this time it finds very little exposed skin. You are warm, mobile, and prepared. You also look like the entire bedding arrangement has decided to go for a walk. 23. Snow is both enemy and additional roofing material. Outside, the snow has changed the village. Every path, post, storage area, and familiar patch of ground has been softened beneath white drifts. The rounded earth lodges no longer resemble separate buildings so much as a collection of low hills that have recently developed smoke holes. Only the entrance passages and thin columns of wood smoke reveal that entire families are living beneath them. Snow is dangerous here, but it is not simply an enemy. When it settles across the thick roof of an earth lodge, it creates another insulating layer between the household and the freezing air. Fresh snow contains countless small pockets of trapped air, and that trapped air slows the movement of heat. The fire still has to burn. The roof does not become warm through encouragement, but a smooth covering of snow can help preserve the warmth already inside. This is excellent news for everyone beneath the roof. It is less excellent news for anyone responsible for keeping the entrance open. The wind pushes loose snow against the covered passage, where it piles into drifts that grow while nobody is watching. By morning, the opening may be narrowed or partly buried. Someone must go outside with a wooden shovel, hide scoop or whatever suitable tool is available, and clear a route before the snow settles, hardens, and begins behaving like construction material. You step into the cold and begin moving it aside. The upper layer is light enough to lift easily. Beneath it, the snow is denser, compressed by wind and its own weight. Each load is thrown away from the passage. Fine crystals blow back across your robe, finding every gap you failed to close while dressing. Your eyelashes collect frost. Your fingers slowly lose interest in the project. Behind you, the wind begins returning snow to the area you have just cleared. This feels personal, but it is merely efficient. Paths between lodges must also be reopened. These routes connect relatives, fuel piles, water sources, animals, storage places, and shared village spaces. After a storm, yesterday's familiar path may be completely invisible. You follow the remembered direction between buildings, testing the ground with each step because uneven surfaces, frozen ruts, and abandoned objects are now concealed beneath a smooth white layer. A basket left outside has disappeared. A log lies beneath the snow, waiting to introduce itself to your shin. A dog bounds past with no concern for established routes, proving once again that 4 legs create an unreasonable amount of confidence. Snow also complicates travel beyond the village. Deep drifts slow hunters and make carrying loads more difficult. Familiar landmarks fade during blowing weather. River ice may be hidden beneath new snow, making thin areas harder to recognize. A clear winter morning can still be bitterly dangerous, especially when sunlight reflecting from the snow makes the landscape appear calm and inviting. The village reads these conditions carefully. The direction of drifting snow reveals the wind. The texture underfoot suggests whether the surface will support weight or collapse beneath it. Smoke rising straight from the lodges signals calmer air. Smoke racing sideways suggests that any journey outside will include a prolonged disagreement with the atmosphere. Snow can also be useful beyond insulation. It preserves tracks, showing where people and animals have travelled. Hunters read marks in its surface that you might mistake for random dents. It can provide water when melted, though only after consuming a great deal of fuel and shrinking into an insultingly small puddle. By late afternoon, the entrances are open again and paths have returned between the lodges. Snow remains thick over every roof, helping hold warmth below while threatening to seal everyone inside. You brush the last crystals from your robe and step back into the passage. Winter has improved the insulation. It has also hidden the front door. 24. The blizzard erases the door and most of the village. Now the storm arrives properly. The horizon disappears first. One moment you can still see the low earth lodges across the village and the dark line of the river valley beyond them. The next, everything outside the entrance passage has become moving white air. Snow races sideways across the ground, lifted and thrown by a wind that appears to have developed a personal objection to permanent settlement. People who are outside return quickly. Wood is carried in. Water vessels are checked. Children are called back from neighbouring lodges, even those who insist they were only going a very short distance. Horses are secured. The outer covering is pulled into place, and the entrance passage is examined for drifting snow. A blizzard does not merely make travel unpleasant, it removes the landmarks that make travel possible. The lodge nearest yours may stand only a short distance away, but within the storm it vanishes completely. Paths disappear beneath fresh snow as soon as they are made. Smoke from the roof openings is torn sideways and lost. Familiar shapes become vague shadows, then nothing at all. You could walk in what feels like a straight line and discover that the wind has gently redirected you toward a frozen riverbank. The sensible response is to remain indoors. This sounds easy until you remember that the household still needs firewood, water, food, and access to the outside world. The entrance must be kept open. Snow driven into the passage collects against the outer covering, pressing inward and narrowing the route. If everyone ignores it until morning, the family may wake to find that the lodge has become extremely secure from the wrong side. Someone checks the passage repeatedly. Snow is pushed away before it becomes packed and heavy. The task is done quickly, with a rope or another person nearby when conditions are severe. Nobody wanders alone into the white air to demonstrate confidence. Confidence is not visible in a blizzard, and has very poor insulating properties. Back near the hearth, the fuel supply is counted without making it look like counting. A storm may last for hours or continue into the following day. Every piece of wood matters. The fire must remain strong enough to warm the lodge and cook food, but not so large that it consumes the entire pile while everyone sits admiring it. Water receives the same attention. Trips to the river are now dangerous, so stored water is used carefully. Snow can be melted, but this costs fuel and produces far less water than its volume suggests. The pot is filled, the snow collapses, and winter once again demonstrates its talent for turning a large amount of effort into a surprisingly small result. The sound outside changes as the storm strengthens. Wind presses across the rounded roof and rushes around the entrance. Fine snow scratches against hide and timber. The central posts remain steady, while smoke shifts beneath the roof whenever the pressure outside alters the airflow through the lodge. You listen for unfamiliar sounds. A sudden creak may mean only that wood has cooled or settled. A heavier movement near the entrance may be the horse shifting in its enclosure. The roof itself has been built to carry earth and snow, but everyone understands the difference between trusting the structure and ignoring it entirely. Inside, the household draws closer to the fire. Work continues where possible. Corn is pounded, clothing is repaired, children are kept occupied. Stories begin earlier because daylight has become irrelevant. The storm has reduced the world to one circular room containing relatives, smoke, stored food, and a horse who has no intention of respecting personal space. Hours pass. When someone finally lifts the entrance covering to check outside, there is no village to be seen. The path is gone. The nearest lodge has vanished. Snow fills the opening almost to the top. The village still exists. It has simply been temporarily removed from view. 25. Ventilation becomes a negotiation with smoke. Let's return to the central problem of indoor fire. Because warmth requires combustion, combustion produces smoke, and smoke has never shown much respect for domestic boundaries. The hearth at the centre of the lodge keeps everyone alive through winter, but it also spends the entire day attempting to fill the room with a grey cloud. The smoke hole above the fire provides the obvious escape route. Warm air rises, carrying smoke toward the opening, while cooler air enters through the covered passage near the floor. In calm weather, this creates a steady movement through the lodge. Fresh air reaches the fire, smoke lifts above the household. Everyone can breathe without giving the arrangement much thought. Then the wind changes. A strong gust passing across the roof alters the air pressure above the smoke hole. The smoke that had been rising neatly may hesitate, flatten beneath the rafters, and begin spreading sideways. Within moments, the upper part of the lodge becomes hazy. Your eyes sting, someone coughs. A child lowers their face closer to the floor, where the air remains clearer. The fire is still warm. It has simply become difficult to see. You cannot close the smoke hole entirely because the smoke would remain inside. You cannot leave it completely exposed during blowing snow because winter will begin falling directly into the hearth. You cannot seal the entrance passage because the flames need oxygen. Yet leaving the entrance too open produces a cold draft that travels across the floor and makes everyone near the outer wall deeply aware of their ankles. This is not a problem solved once. It is managed all day. The amount of fuel matters. A large fire produces more heat, but it also produces more smoke and consumes wood rapidly. Damp cottonwood smoulders and sends thick smoke upward without providing enough useful warmth in return. Dry wood burns better, although every dry piece had to be gathered, transported and protected from snow before reaching the hearth. Someone watches the colour and movement of the smoke. Thin smoke rising steadily suggests the fire is burning well. A dark layer gathering beneath the roof means something must change. The wood may need rearranging. The bullboat covering above the opening may need to be tilted differently. The entrance covering may be opened slightly to improve the draft. Every adjustment solves one problem while introducing another. Open the entrance and cold air enters. Reduce the opening and smoke gathers. Increase the fire and the lodge warms but the fuel pile shrinks. Lower the roof covering and snow stays out while the smoke begins, considering a return visit. Years of this leave the interior timbers darkened with soot. The central posts, rafters, robes, baskets, clothing and hair all carry the smell of wood smoke. Your eyes and lungs adjust as much as they can, but a smoky lodge remains smoky. People position themselves according to the moving air, shifting a sleeping robe or work area when the smoke repeatedly chooses one side of the room. Smoke is not entirely unwelcome. Materials hung above the fire can dry in the rising warmth. Meat may be preserved through exposure to smoke. Insects find the atmosphere less inviting than people do. The same smoke irritating your eyes is also helping protect food and useful household materials. By evening, the wind outside settles. The smoke straightens above the fire and disappears cleanly through the roof. The lodge becomes clearer. Faces emerge from the haze, and everyone returns to the places they occupied before the atmosphere became complicated. You take a deep breath. The fire is warm, the smoke is leaving, and the ventilation system has achieved temporary peace. No one touches anything. 26. Repairs continue, while the weather objects. During a calmer period, you step outside to inspect what the storm has been doing to the lodge. The wind has weakened, but it has not become friendly. It moves loose snow across the roof in thin white sheets and presses cold air through every opening it can find. Smoke rises more steadily now, revealing that the ventilation has recovered from its earlier disagreement with the weather. From inside, the lodge feels permanent. Its posts are thick, its roof is heavy, and its walls appear to be part of the earth itself. Outside, however, you can see that the structure survives because people continue looking after it. Earth settles, grass loosens, willow bends, water searches for small gaps, snow adds weight, wind removes anything that was not secured properly. The lodge is strong. It is not self-employed. You begin near the entrance passage, where drifting snow has packed itself against the outer walls. The snow must be cleared before it melts and refreezes into a hard ridge. The hide covering is checked for tears, stiffened edges, and places where the wind has stretched its bindings. A small opening can become a serious draft, and a serious draft can turn the passage into a narrow corridor devoted entirely to freezing everyone's feet. Loose earth is pressed back into place along the outside wall. Grass and smaller branches may be added where the covering has thinned. The work is done carefully because the roof is layered. Beneath the visible soil are grass, willow, rafters, beams, and the household you would prefer not to visit unexpectedly from above. Rain and melting snow create particular problems. Water does not need a large hole. It needs only a slight depression where it can gather, soak downward, freeze, expand, and make the next storm more interesting. Low places on the roof are filled and smoothed so moisture runs away from the smoke opening and entrance. If a drip has appeared inside, someone remembers exactly where it fell. Finding the same point outside is more difficult than it sounds. The roof is broad, rounded, and covered in earth. You stand above the lodge while a relative calls directions from below, explaining that the leak is slightly left of the central beam, but not that beam, the other one. This process strengthens family communication by testing it severely. Repairs also continue inside. Rafters are examined for cracking or rot. Lashings and fitted joints are checked. Sleeping platforms may need tightening after months of use. A post worn by ropes, tools, or repeated movement is watched carefully. Soot is cleared where it has gathered too heavily. though nobody expects the ceiling to regain its original colour. The packed earth floor requires attention as well. Foot traffic creates hollows, spilled water softens patches near the hearth. Ash, scraps, dried mud, and bits of grass collect through ordinary household life. The surface is swept, levelled, and packed again until it becomes firm beneath your feet. None of this is postponed until the lodge becomes visibly unsafe. Maintenance works because small problems are noticed early. A loosened covering is repaired before the wind removes it. A weak rafter is strengthened before the roof complains. A leaking section is sealed before rain begins falling beside the cooking pot. Children watch and assist, carrying grass, gathering small branches, or pressing fresh earth into gaps. They learn where damage appears and how different materials respond to weather. The lodge is teaching construction even while it is being repaired. By afternoon, the entrance is clear, the roof has been smoothed, and the weakened covering has been restored. You step back inside, brush snow from your clothing, and return to the fire. The lodge looks unchanged. That is how you know the repair went well. 27. The Earth Lodge is sacred as well as practical. Now the story moves deeper because the Earth Lodge is not merely an ingenious response to cold. It is also a place shaped by sacred knowledge, family relationships, memory, and responsibilities that cannot be explained by insulation alone. The fire warms you, the roof blocks the wind, and the cache protects the harvest. But these practical functions do not exhaust what the lodge means to the people who built and lived within it. Among the Hidatsa, the experienced woman directing construction possessed sacred as well as practical knowledge. She did not merely know where to place the posts so the roof remained above the family. She understood the proper way to create the lodge as a meaningful home within a living cultural tradition. Younger women learned the work through participation, carrying that knowledge forward rather than treating the building as a pile of materials accompanied by an unusually serious instruction manual. Once inside, space is not used randomly. A protected area may hold sacred property belonging to the household. In the reconstructed Hidatsa-style lodge at Knife River, the shrine occupies a respected place near one of the main posts. You do not step casually across the area in front of it simply because taking that route would save 3 seconds on the way to your sleeping platform. Movement through the lodge follows rules shaped by respect as well as convenience. This changes how you understand the room. The 4 central posts are still structural supports. They carry beams, rafters, grass, earth, snow, and the continuing good fortune of everyone who prefers the roof in its current position. Yet they can also possess meaning beyond their mechanical work. The posts stand within a home where sacred objects are cared for. Ceremonies may be prepared, prayers offered, and relationships with spiritual powers acknowledged. The central hearth also becomes more than a cooking fire. It marks the living centre around which the household gathers. Food is prepared there, children learn there, guests are received there. Stories pass between generations there. Smoke rises from the flames toward the opening above, joining the enclosed world of the lodge with the sky outside. The earth surrounds you below and above. Timber rises between the two. Fire burns in the centre. You do not need to force this arrangement into one simple symbol. Its meanings belong to the people whose traditions created it, and those meanings differ among the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. An earth lodge is not a universal Native American temple disguised as a house. It is a culturally specific home in which the sacred and the ordinary are not required to occupy separate buildings. A meal can be practical and meaningful. Building a roof can involve engineering and inherited responsibility. Caring for a sacred bundle can happen in the same room where a child has misplaced a moccasin, and the horse near the entrance has begun expressing itself physically. Nothing about the sacred requires daily life to stop. Daily life is where it continues. The lodge also holds family memory. Children grow beneath its beams. Relatives gather around its fire. Skills are taught beside its posts. Important objects remain protected within it. Over years, the structure becomes marked by smoke, repairs, celebrations, losses, and the ordinary repetition through which a place becomes inseparable from the people who know it. Eventually, the lodge may need to be rebuilt. Wood weakens, earth settles, families change, yet the knowledge used to create it remains alive when it is taught and practiced again. The new structure is not an exact replacement for everything that happened in the old one, but it carries forward the relationships that made an earth lodge more than shelter. You return to your place beside the fire and look upward at the dark central posts. They are holding several tons of prairie above your head, which remains an impressive contribution. They are also holding something that cannot be weighed. For once, the architecture is doing more than keeping the weather out. 28. Visitors bring trade, news, and an unacceptable amount of cold air. The storm passes, and visitors begin moving between lodges again. The first sign is the sound of packed snow beneath approaching feet. Then the covering at the end of the entrance passage lifts. Pale daylight floods the tunnel, and a blade of freezing air travels across the floor with astonishing accuracy. Everyone nearest the doorway pulls a robe tighter while the visitor steps inside carrying snow, news, and no visible sense of guilt. Hospitality matters, so nobody tells them to close the entrance faster. They are welcomed toward the central fire. Snow is brushed from robes and moccasins before it melts into the floor. Goods are placed carefully beside a sleeping platform or support post. Someone makes space near the hearth, which requires several people to shift baskets, tools, children, and one relative who has settled into the best position and intends to defend it through stillness. Visitors may come from another household within the same village, bringing family news or asking for help. Others may arrive from neighboring villages or more distant nations. The Mandan and Hidatsa communities along the upper Missouri stand at the center of extensive trade networks. Their agricultural surplus, permanent settlements, and position near major travel routes make the villages important gathering places for exchange. Corn, beans, squash, and other stored foods can be traded alongside prepared hides, robes, crafted objects, and tobacco. Visitors may bring horses, meat, tools, pigments, shells, metal goods, cloth, weapons, or materials obtained through chains of exchange stretching far beyond the river valley. An object beside the fire may have travelled farther than anyone currently sitting around it. A shell could come from distant waters. Metal might have passed through several communities before reaching the village. A horse may carry a history of breeding, exchange, capture, training, and ownership that is discussed with more attention than many modern people give to a used car. Trade is not merely a matter of placing two objects on the floor and deciding that both sides seem cheerful. Relationships matter. Kinship, reputation, previous exchanges, diplomacy, generosity, and obligation shape what happens. Gifts may strengthen an alliance or acknowledge hospitality. Bargaining can be patient. The value of an item depends on need, scarcity, workmanship, and the relationship between the people involved. Nobody has printed a recommended retail price on the buffalo robe. Information travels with the goods. Visitors report where bison have been seen, which routes remain passable, how deep the snow lies farther west, and whether unfamiliar people have appeared along the river. They carry news of marriages, deaths, births, disputes, ceremonies, hunting success, and relatives who continue behaving exactly as everyone predicted. This information can be as valuable as anything placed beside the fire. Knowing that game has moved, that a trail is unsafe, or that traders are approaching may alter the plans of an entire household. News is repeated, questioned, compared with other reports, and eventually carried into the next lodge. By evening, one conversation may exist in 12 slightly different versions. During the early 19th century, European and Euro-American traders also reached these villages with increasing frequency. They bring manufactured goods and seek hides, food, horses, and access to indigenous trade networks that already existed long before their arrival. They depend heavily on local knowledge and supplies, even when their written accounts later behave as though the landscape had been waiting patiently to become interesting. Visitors are fed when circumstances allow. A pot may be extended with corn, beans, meat, or squash. Tobacco can be shared. The fire provides warmth, and conversation continues while the wind moves harmlessly over the roof. At last, the guests prepare to leave. Robes are wrapped, goods are gathered. Final messages are remembered just as everyone reaches the entrance. The covering lifts again. Cold air races into the lodge for the 5th time. International commerce remains important, but it is becoming extremely difficult on the ankles. 29. Other Plains nations build their own. Earth Lodge worlds. Let's widen the map. Because the Mandan and Hidatsa are not the only indigenous peoples who discovered that placing soil over a carefully built wooden frame is an excellent way to make winter less personally aggressive. Farther south along the Missouri River, The Arikara also live in permanent villages of substantial earth lodges. Their settlements are connected to fields of corn, beans, squash and sunflowers, as well as hunting grounds, river travel, and broad systems of trade. Like the Mandan and Hidatsa, they are farmers as well as hunters, maintaining communities that remain in place through seasons when much of the surrounding landscape appears to have stopped cooperating. You approach an Arikara village and recognize the general principle immediately. Rounded roofs rise from the earth, smoke escapes through central openings, covered entrances interrupt the wind. Inside, families gather around hearths while crops wait in storage pits below the floor. Yet recognizing the structure does not mean everything inside it is the same. The Arikara have their own language, ceremonies, political organization, family relationships, and ways of understanding the lodge. Similar materials do not create identical cultures. Modern neighborhoods contain thousands of houses made from timber, brick, and plaster, yet nobody assumes every family inside them has the same traditions, simply because the roofing contractor used familiar methods. Continue south into the river valleys of what will later be called Nebraska, and you encounter the great earth lodge villages of the Pawnee. Their circular lodges are arranged around central spaces and connected to extensive agricultural fields. The Pawnee Confederacy includes distinct bands, each with its own villages and leadership, united through broader political and ceremonial relationships. A Pawnee earth lodge contains familiar features. Heavy central posts support the roof. A hearth occupies the middle. A smoke hole opens above it. Beds, workspaces, storage areas, and cache pits fill the interior. A long entrance passage leads through the outer wall. The organization and sacred meaning of that space, however, belong specifically to Pawnee life. The lodge can reflect relationships between earth, sky, stars, fire, family, and ceremony in ways that should not simply be borrowed and placed into a Mandan or Hidatsa home because the floor plan looks convenient. For much of the year, Pawnee families live in their permanent agricultural villages. During major bison hunts, they leave the heavy earth lodges behind and travel in portable tipis. One form of architecture supports farming, storage, ceremony, and settled village life. The other supports movement across the plains. This is not a contradiction. It is an extremely sensible housing portfolio. Omaha, Ponca, Oto, Iowa, and Missouri communities also establish earth lodge villages in parts of the Central Plains. Their histories and movements differ, but many combine maize agriculture with hunting and seasonal travel. Gardens grow near the villages, while the rivers provide timber, water, transport routes, and fertile soil. The result is not one enormous earth lodge culture spread evenly across the map. It is a series of distinct nations, adapting related building techniques to their own lands and lives. Dimensions vary. Interior arrangements vary. Construction practices, village layouts, household organization, and ceremonial meanings vary. Some lodges are large enough to shelter extended families. Others serve particular community or sacred purposes. Some settlements stand behind defensive works. Others shift location as river channels move, resources change, conflict threatens, or households establish new villages. What they share is an understanding that architecture must do more than look impressive. It must protect stored crops. It must survive wind. It must shelter children and elders. It must provide space for work, visitors, ceremony, food preparation, and the continued presence of relatives who have apparently decided to stay until spring. You look across this wider world of river valleys, farming towns, hunting routes, and earth-covered roofs. There was never one universal plains home. There were many intelligent solutions to the same unreasonable weather. 30. Older pithouses. Carry the idea far beyond the plains. Now travel west and farther back in time. Because earth-covered architecture did not begin or end beside the Missouri River. Across large parts of the Southwest, the Great Basin, the Colorado Plateau, and other regions of western North America, Indigenous communities built pithouses by lowering part of the living space into the ground and raising a timber roof above it. The details change from place to place and century to century. There was no single ancient blueprint circulating across the continent with a note reading, "Dig first, ask questions later." Some pithouses were shallow depressions with walls rising above ground. Others were excavated more deeply, placing much of the room beneath the surrounding surface. Posts supported beams and rafters. Smaller branches, reeds, grass, clay, and earth covered the roof. A hearth occupied the interior, while a smoke opening allowed heat and fumes to escape. You descend into one of these structures and immediately notice the difference from standing outside. The wind passes over the lower walls. The earth surrounding the room slows sudden changes in temperature. During cold nights, the interior holds warmth more effectively than an exposed shelter. During hot weather, the ground can help keep the space cooler. The house is not controlling the climate. It is simply arranged not to experience all of it at once. Among ancestral Pueblo communities, pithouses appeared in many forms over long periods. Earlier examples often served as domestic homes, containing hearths, storage spaces, work areas, and room for family life. Entry might be through an opening in the roof using a ladder, although side entrances and ventilating passages also appeared in some periods and places. Climbing down through the roof feels unusual, only because modern houses have trained you to expect the door somewhere near the wall. Here, the ladder brings you directly into the centre of the room. It also means anyone entering is briefly visible from the feet downward, which removes much of the dignity from an unexpected arrival. A ventilator opening or passage near floor level can draw fresh air toward the hearth. A low wall or deflector may redirect that incoming air, stopping it from blowing directly into the flames. Warm air and smoke then rise toward the roof opening. Once again, ventilation becomes a carefully managed relationship between fire and weather. Over time, many ancestral Pueblo settlements included increasing numbers of above-ground rooms built from stone and adobe. Domestic life shifted into these connected structures, but subterranean or partly underground spaces did not simply disappear. Buildings now called kivas developed as important ceremonial and community rooms. Their exact forms and meanings varied, and their histories cannot be reduced to the claim that every old pit house automatically became a kiva. Architecture changes gradually. Communities adapt older forms, preserve significant features, and give particular spaces new or continuing roles. Elsewhere, Indigenous peoples built pithouses suited to different environments. In parts of the Great Basin and interior northwest, winter dwellings could be excavated deeply enough to provide substantial protection from cold. Roofs were supported by timber and covered with earth, brush, or mats. Families entered through roof openings or side passages depending on the regional tradition. The surrounding ground provided insulation, but the house still required fuel, maintenance, stored food, and constant attention. Earth shelter did not remove winter chores. It merely allowed you to perform them without the wind standing directly beside you. Archaeologists can sometimes identify an old pit house long after its roof and walls have vanished. What remains may be a circular or rectangular depression, post holes, a hearth, storage pits, ash, tools, food remains, and the marks of repeated repair. To an untrained eye, it may look like a shallow patch of uneven ground. To someone who knows how to read it, it is a home. You stand within the lowered floor and look toward the ladder leading back into the cold air. Long before modern insulation, furnaces, and double-glazed windows, people understood that the earth beneath their feet could become part of the shelter around them. The idea is ancient, practical, and widely adaptable. Humanity spent thousands of years perfecting the warm hole. Eventually it invented the basement and filled it with boxes. 31. The underground system works because the community does. Let's gather everything together. The lodge protects you because the roof is thick, the floor is lowered, the entrance interrupts the wind, and the fire burns at the centre. The cache pits protect food. The robes hold warmth. The village stands near water, timber, gardens, hunting grounds, and trade routes. From the outside, all of this can look like a collection of clever individual solutions. It is not. The system works because people work together. No one person builds an earth lodge alone. Cottonwood posts must be selected, cut, moved, raised, and joined. Willow branches must be gathered, grass must be dried. Earth must be carried onto the roof in quantities large enough to make the entire project feel like an argument with gravity. Experienced women direct the construction, while relatives and neighbours contribute labour. The finished lodge belongs to a household, but many hands make it possible. The same is true of food. Women prepare gardens, plant seeds, tend crops, gather the harvest, dry the produce, and store it underground. Children assist as their skills develop. Hunters bring meat and hides back to the village. Other people butcher, dry, smoke, carry, and distribute what has been taken. A successful hunt does not end when the animal falls. That is when the paperwork begins, except the paperwork is several hundred kilograms of bison. Winter survival depends on all this labour having happened earlier. The corn in the cache is spring and summer work preserved beneath the floor. The robe around your shoulders is hunting and hide, preparation transformed into warmth. The firewood beside the hearth is a journey to the river valley converted into future heat. Even knowledge is stored. Older relatives remember where fuel can be found, how the river ice behaves, when a roof is beginning to fail, and which clouds suggest that everyone should stop travelling and return indoors. They know how to prepare food, train horses, repair tools, and recognise illness or danger before it becomes impossible to ignore. Children learn by watching and helping. They begin with small tasks and are gradually trusted with larger ones. Nobody survives by reaching adulthood without understanding how the household functions. You cannot spend 20 years saying you are more of an ideas person while everyone else carries water. Families also support one another between lodges. If illness prevents someone from working, relatives can bring food or fuel. If a household loses supplies, others may share what they have. Large construction and repair jobs draw many people together. News about weather, hunting, trade, danger, and travel passes rapidly through the village. This does not mean everyone lives in perfect harmony. People disagree. Relatives become annoyed. Someone forgets a task. Someone else remembers the failure in surprising detail years later. Community does not eliminate human irritation. It simply ensures that irritation occurs while the wood is still being carried. The village also relies on relationships beyond itself. Trade connects the Mandan and Hidatsa with neighbouring nations and distant regions. Goods, horses, materials, and information move along routes maintained through diplomacy, kinship, generosity, and reputation. You survive partly because someone you may never meet exchanged something useful several journeys ago. By evening, you understand that the underground system is not truly underground. Only part of it is buried. The rest lives in memory, obligation, family, skill, and the willingness to continue working when the weather has become unreasonable. The lodge holds the heat. The cache holds the food. The community holds everything else. 32. Night returns over the Earth Lodge village. At last, darkness settles across the snow. The last pale light withdraws from the western sky, and the village slowly disappears into its own shadows. Rounded roofs become dark shapes beneath the white covering. Entrance passages fade into the drifts. Only the thin columns of smoke rising from each lodge reveal where families have gathered beneath the earth. The air outside grows sharper as the sun vanishes. Snow that softens slightly during the day begins to harden again. Every step produces a dry creak. The river lies silent beneath its ice, while the open plains beyond the village become a wide darkness with nothing to interrupt the wind. You return through the entrance passage carrying the final armful of wood. Cold follows you into the tunnel, but the interior windbreak stops most of it from reaching the central fire. You brush snow from your robe and moccasins before stepping into the warmer room. The outer covering falls back into place, and the world beyond it immediately feels more distant. Inside, the evening meal is nearly finished. A pot remains beside the fire, holding the last portions of corn, beans, squash, and meat. Steam rises through the smoke. Wooden bowls are passed around the hearth. Everyone eats slowly, partly because the food is hot and partly because this is the first time all day when nobody is expected to carry something heavy through snow. The lodge has completed another transformation. It was a bedroom before sunrise, a kitchen during breakfast, a workshop through the afternoon, and now it becomes the place where the household settles together for the night. Tools are returned to their proper places. Food containers are covered. The cache opening is checked and sealed. Damp moccasins are placed near enough to the fire to dry but not close enough to become smaller, harder versions of themselves by morning. Robes are shaken out and arranged over the sleeping platforms. Near the entrance, the prized horse shifts inside its enclosure. It has eaten, been watered, and spent most of the day observing human labour without offering practical assistance. It releases a long breath and settles again with the confidence of someone whose position in the household remains completely secure. The fire is allowed to grow lower. A large blaze would waste fuel through the night, so the wood is arranged to leave a dependable bed of coals. Ash will protect the remaining heat until morning, when someone can uncover it and begin the whole process again. The flames shrink, and the lodge darkens around their red glow. Conversation softens with the light. An older relative continues a story begun earlier in the day. Children listen from beneath their robes, becoming unusually quiet now that no one is asking them to work. The story moves through remembered places, family histories, animals, journeys, warnings, and humour. It has been told before, but repetition does not make it less valuable. It makes it easier to carry. Outside, wind moves across the roof, snow brushes against the entrance. The great cottonwood posts stand dark around the hearth, holding the beams, rafters, earth, and frozen prairie above you. Nothing inside feels temporary. The food below the floor will last because it was planted, gathered, dried, and protected. The fire will return because wood was collected and its coals were preserved. The lodge will stand because people built it correctly and repaired it before small damage became serious. The household will wake because everyone has contributed to keeping it alive. One by one, voices fall silent. You lie back beneath the heavy buffalo robe. Around you, relatives breathe in the darkness. The horse shifts once more. Smoke rises through the hole above the fire and disappears into the winter sky. Beyond the walls, the night remains brutal. Beneath several tons of prairie, it is finally somebody else's problem.